Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Jacob Blindenbach is going to give us a primer on homomorphic encryption and privacy preservation for genomics. And he's a PhD candidate in computer science at Columbia University. So I think we're going to get started now. Thank you, Jacob.
Okay. Does the microphone work? Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk. Yes, and thank you for the introduction. So today's talk is going to focus on mainly homomorphic encryption. I want to give you guys kind of a mathematical overview as well as kind of like an overview for a practitioner so that you guys can apply these techniques. And I'm going to end my talk with kind of an application in the genome privacy space. So for data protection, right, there's three different kinds of ways we protect data. We protect data in transit with TLS, where we kind of encrypt messages and data that gets sent between devices. We also encrypt data at rest using AES to keep it secure from attackers. And finally, we have this kind of new frontier that's recently developing, which is encrypting data that's in use. So that's actually computing on encrypted data when it's in the cloud. And there's like a few different developing technologies. These are called privacy-enhancing technologies. But there's a lot of challenges for data in use because right now there's a huge performance hit, applicability is low, and usability is still a challenge. So let's take a deep dive into some of these technologies real quick. The first one is a trusted execution environment, which is like an Intel SGX. This is like a hardware chip that can perform this data in use encryption. Unfortunately, it's quite vulnerable to side channel attacks, but it's very performant. It's actually really close to plain text, which is just computing it not on encrypted data. We also have secure multi-party computation, where we kind of split data into pieces that we give to separate computing parties, and then each computing party can kind of evaluate some function and it kind of reshare it back. And none of the computing parties can essentially see the full data because it's split. This is more secure than a trusted execution environment, but it's a bit slower. Finally, and what we're going to focus on mainly in this talk is homomorphic encryption, which lets us directly compute on encrypted data called ciphertexts. And this is great because it's mathematically secure. So there's like guaranteed properties of security. Unfortunately, as we'll show, it's very slow and it's not quite performant. It's about 100 to 1,000,000 times slower. So let me take a brief, quick overview of homomorphic encryption, which really highlights what I want to bring home in this talk. So with homomorphic encryption, we can kind of delegate computation to an untrusted party. So here in our little example, we have, let's say some trusted party has some data, X. They can encrypt this data, send it to a trusted computing party that can evaluate some function, let's say G. And this function could be something like, let's say, machine learning inference. They can send that data back. The original party can then decrypt it and then see the output of the function. And in this scenario with homomorphic encryption, we have mathematical guarantees that the untrusted party will never be able to see the original data X, because that X is always encrypted when it's being computed on by the untrusted party. This is, unfortunately, computationally very expensive. And unfortunately, the types of operations that we can do on this encrypted data is limited to additions and multiplications only. But that's nice because we can evaluate polynomials. So when we're trying to do bioinformatics algorithms, like let's say this untrusted party is trying to do a GWAS, for example, genome-wide association study, we have to simplify those algorithms to only use additions and multiplications. This is really what I want to take home, the message I want to share with you guys today. Yes?
Is there something like that doesn't work specifically about doing like inverse operations like division and subtraction?
Yes. Well, you can do subtraction. Division is tricky. The way that people do that now is they basically find a polynomial that's kind of approximates division, and then you evaluate that. So it's a very expensive operation. And we'll get into that. I'll show you some examples soon. So let's dive very deeply into the math. So homomorphic encryption is secure because of this problem called ring learning with errors, which cryptographers have deemed to be a difficult problem. In ring learning with errors, we work with polynomials in this specific algebraic structure that looks really scary, but I'll break it down. It's essentially polynomials that have coefficients modulo q. So that means that they're between 0 to q minus 1, and they're bounded to have a degree less than n. And if you have polynomials with this kind of structure, then for some secret polynomial and a pair of polynomials, a and b, where b is essentially just the multiplication of a times that secret, plus a little bit of Gaussian noise, it's theorized that this is very computationally difficult to find that original secret polynomial. So an attacker who sees a and b will basically never be able to extract s. So this is great because we can then use this to build our homomorphic encryption scheme. And the one I'm going to be focusing on today is called the BGV scheme, where we start with the secret key, which is, again, that same polynomial that we saw before. And then for encryption, we get that same pair of polynomials, except we're going to add some noise again. That's t times our little bit of error. And then we're going to hide our message by just adding it to the end. Now, under this scheme, essentially, this pair of polynomials, this a and b, is going to look random with that if you don't have the knowledge of the secret key. So under RLWE, essentially, our message is hidden, even if we share this ciphertext with the rest of the world. And decryption is quite simple. If you have the secret key, you can just multiply that by a, and then do b minus a times s, and you get back your original message. So this is great. We have an encryption scheme, and I'll show you how to do addition and multiplication on this. But before we get into that, I'm talking about messages here. We usually work with data that's integers and floats. So how does that all come together? Well, we can actually embed integers into polynomials of degree n, which is our message polynomial, using what is known as the Chinese remainder theorem and residual number systems. And essentially, we can take a polynomial of degree m and store n integers inside of it. And there's this nice isomorphism that happens where if we add polynomials with this embedding, we actually add all of the basically like the vector components. And this works for addition and multiplication, which, as I said, in homomorphic encryption are the only two operations that are supported. So this is quite nice. Now this kind of works in practice is we can take a bunch of vector of a bunch of integers and another vector of a bunch of integers. We encrypt them into ciphertexts, into single ciphertexts. We do one addition operation. And then when we decrypt them, we get the pairwise sum of all of these. So really in homomorphic encryption, we're not doing very many operations. So the throughput, it can be quite high because this n, the size of these vectors can be up to 4,000, 8,000, 16,000. They're gigantic. But unfortunately, the latency is quite high. So these add operations are quite expensive. So you have to be quite clever with how you kind of pack these vectors inside of our ciphertext and how we organize this data. So that was a bit of how we encode the data. Now we can talk about the exact operations we can perform on ciphertexts. So as you remember, each ciphertext is a pair of polynomials. And homomorphic addition is super simple. We basically just add the components of two ciphertexts. So if we have a ciphertext 1, that's A1, B1, and a ciphertext 2, A2, B2, the sum is just going to be the A1 plus A2 and B1 plus B2. Correctness, yep. When we do the decryption step with the secret key, we get our output that's M1 and M2. So exactly what we had before. Now, there is something that is crucial to homomorphic encryption, which is that the error grew. If you see that the E1 plus E2, it's now twice the error of the original ciphertext. So for our visual people out there, if we have a ciphertext, you can kind of imagine it as a block where we have our payload, our message, and then we have that error that sits push T above our payload. And then we have what is known as a noise budget. And as we perform homomorphic operations like this addition and multiplication, our error is going to grow and it's going to consume this noise budget. So as we saw with the addition, our error increased twofold. And if we keep doing these operations, our error can grow. And once the error exceeds the noise budget, because we're working modulo Q, it's going to wrap around the ring and it's going to enter what is our payload. And it's actually going to corrupt our message. And we will no longer be able to decrypt. So when we perform homomorphic operations, we have to be very cognizant of the error. Because if we consume too much and we exceed our noise budget, everything is kaput. Yes?
Is the noise budget something like a set of parity bits? Is that how I should think about this?
No.
No.
You should think about it as like, you basically just have a log capacity. And then after each operation, your error is going to take up more and more of this capacity. And then as soon as it exceeds that, then it's all gone.
I guess what's confusing me is how do you make sure that the error is just taking up the noise budget?
Yes. So when we do these operations, the error just grows because it's just pushed T away from our payload message. So the error is always going to be T, like T bits or log T bits from our payload message. And so it's never going to be at that front. You can actually think of homomorphic encryption really as these coefficients as this, plus some masking, which was that secret key times an original random polynomial that I was talking about. So if you remove that during decryption, you essentially always get kind of messages that look like this. That makes sense. So for multiplication, things get a little bit more tricky, but we have a ciphertext that's again a pair. When we multiply, we have to do something special, and we're gonna get a ciphertext that actually has 3 components: A1, A2, A1 times B2 plus B2, B1 times A2, and B1 times B2. So given a ciphertext that looks like this, we can again run a decryption algorithm, but this time it's a little bit more complicated because we need the secret key squared. And we can do that because the secret key is a polynomial. You guys can just trust me on this, that it works and it decrypts to produce our messages squared. The important takeaway here is that the error is squared. So when we do multiplication, we really quickly consume our noise budget because the error squares. And then so if we do repeated multiplications, then it would explode exponentially. So we need to have a technique to deal with this. And to give you guys some like in practice numbers, if we have an n, so that's the size of our polynomials, of about 4,000, which is pretty standard, plain text modulus T of 127, and a log Q of about 101. Then just after 3 repeated squarings, we already have accumulated enough noise that it exceeds the noise budget. So essentially, our ciphertext is ruined. So we need a technique to manage this. And in BGV, luckily, we can do something called modulus switching. So inside of our ciphertext modulus, we can actually think about it as a chain, where we have a bunch of prime factors that are the decomposition of our original ciphertext modulus. And so we start off with this big ciphertext modulus, and then we kind of chop it up as we go along. And yeah, the way we chop it up is we just multiply by the new modulus, which is slightly smaller, divided by the old modulus, and then we do some rounding operations. What's nice about this is that if we're smart about how we choose this ciphertext modulus chain, then when we do this scaling down operation, we actually preserve our original message, but the error kind of decreases and our ciphertext gets smaller. So yeah, and this is that property that I was talking about. We can still run out of noise budget, and then we would have to perform what is known as a bootstrapping operation, which kind of resets the noise, but it's extremely expensive. Okay, that was a lot. So I want to talk about how this all works in practice, using something that I think you guys probably all work on, transformers. So here we have a simple transformer architecture with an attention mechanism and then a feed-forward network. So this paper that's posted on arXiv actually does this using homomorphic encryption. So we can encrypt our input, run it through this transformer algorithm, and get back an output that we can decrypt later. And the way that it looks like is this table here where we have to perform some matrix multiplications and do a softmax, more matrix multiplications, layer normalization, essentially go through all the normal transformer models. What I want to highlight here is the depth, because this is kind of the key when you're implementing these things. That's the size of that ciphertext chain. So we started off with a ciphertext change that's 21 ciphertext primes. And then we decrease that all the way down to 1. And then we have to perform that expensive bootstrapping operation that I was talking about before to bring it back and replenish that noise. And then we can keep going. So after each multiplication operation, usually in homomorphic encryption, we perform this ciphertext modulus so that the noise growth stays minimal. And what's nice about this is when we perform this modulus switch, our ciphertext, as I showed before, gets smaller, which means that our operations actually get much, much faster. So as you see in the original matrix multiplication, at the highest layer, which is 21, it takes about, 65 seconds to perform this on the CPU. But when we do a very similar sized matrix multiplication on a depth of just 2, it takes only 2 seconds. So it's much, much faster. And this is why implementing these things right now is quite tricky, and applying or taking genomic analysis and doing it homomorphically is tricky from an implementation standpoint, because you need to be very careful with how you kind of organize your algorithm so that you maximize performance, because there's a 30x difference here. So yeah, you need to be smart about how you implement these things. For nonlinear operations like division that you were talking about before, we have softmax, layer norm, GLU. We have to approximate these with polynomials. So here's an example polynomial that they use to approximate GLU. These consume a lot of depth because they're quite complicated. As you can see, with the softmax, right, we go from 19 to 3. So we're consuming a lot of depth, and they're also quite slow if you look at 47 seconds to perform this softmax. Because secure transformers require so many operations, we do have to perform this bootstrapping operation that I was talking about before to basically replenish the depth and get our noise budget back. And these are very, very expensive operations. So when you're implementing these homomorphic algorithms, you honestly want to avoid bootstrapping at all costs. You can see in the breakdown of the timings for each layer, the bootstrapping layer is by far the most expensive, taking almost 100 plus seconds to do. Thankfully, we don't really have to worry about the foundational implementation of these homomorphic encryption schemes, because there's a lot of tools that exist out there to do them for us. So for the scheme I introduced today, the BGV scheme, there's a bunch of implementations, Seal by Microsoft, Latigo, Helib, and they perform this integer. They can do homomorphic encryption on integers, supporting addition and multiplication. There's also tools out there using a scheme called CKKS to actually do homomorphic encryption on floating point values. So that's actually what was used in that secure transformer model that I showed before from that paper. And then again, Seal and Latigo support this. There's also a different type of scheme called CGGI, which supports bits. And this is very good for like comparisons and nonlinear operations, but it's not great for arithmetic operations. But that uses kind of a different scheme. And then you can use the TFHE library for that. So how does this all kind of work in practice? I wanted to talk about a project I did with Gamza called Ultra Secure Scalable and Queryable Genotype-Phenotype Databases with Squid. And so for a quick background, why do we keep genome secure? It's a very important problem. There are a lot of attacks that even taking anonymized genomes and anonymized data, genomic data, you can perform surname inferences, you can find out familial connections, and once your DNA is breached, there's really no way to change it. So it's out there forever, as well as like your parents share a bunch of your DNA, your children also share a bunch of your DNA. So it can be quite harmful. So when we perform genomic data, like a genomic data analysis, such as on the 1,000 Genomes project, we typically have a data owner like the NIH that has all of the data that's encrypted at rest. and then a researcher wants to analyze this, so they download it all locally, and then they perform the analysis, which is great. But as data continues to grow and we get more and more genomic data, the computational storage and the communication costs to just download it start to really blow up. Furthermore, the data owner really has no control over any guarantees of privacy or security. Once the data is in the hands of the researcher, it's kind of like assumed that the researcher will be smart about how they handle and manipulate the data. If a patient wants to drop out from the cohort, it's a challenging process to have all the researchers kind of remove that patient. So really, can we apply these techniques, this homomorphic encryption technique, to do in-use encryption? So we conjured up this scenario where a data owner who has all of the data basically encrypts it and sends it to the public cloud. And then clients, our researchers, they can analyze it by sending queries to the public cloud. And yeah, in this setting, like we're going to use homomorphic encryption, right? Because we don't want the public cloud to ever have access or can see what this genomic data is. We want to keep it ultra secure. So we built out a bunch of possible queries that the researchers can perform when you perform this kind of scenario. And the one that I kind of want to talk about is counting queries. But before I get into that, I really want to quickly talk about how to do this data storage and how to store this in the cloud. So we worked with genomic data that looks like this. We have a bunch of SNPs for a bunch of patients. So very similar to kind of what the 1,000 genomes data set looks like. But we also have some phenotypes, sex, smoke, if they're a smoker or not, or some disease that researchers might want to analyze. So right, each row contains patient information, and each column contains either a SNP or a phenotype. Using that homomorphic encryption packing that I discussed before, we can actually store these entire rows of patients for like a single SNP into a single ciphertext, which is great because it gives us kind of very natural parallelism. So how do we perform a counting query? Let's say a researcher submits, can I count how many patients in this database have SNP2 is equal to 1 and sex is equal to 1? When this gets sent to the cloud, we will kind of want to compute this query and then send it back to the researcher who can decrypt it using, again, homomorphic encryption. So how do we perform this? Well, when we get this query coming in, we're going to have to first perform equality tests. Basically, we need to check for each patient in the database. Do they have a 1 for SNP2? And do they have a 1 for sex1? Unfortunately, an equality test is a nonlinear operation. So like we said, we have to approximate this with a polynomial. So we're going to first build out this truth table where U is our database value and V is the query value. And essentially, it's just the one on the diagonal when the values are equal. Very simple. We are going to assume that the query value U is not private. The only value that is private is our database entry. So we can just generate 3 different polynomials that kind of evaluate this truth function. And this is kind of how you actually normally would perform this translation of nonlinear functions into polynomials that you can evaluate homomorphically. So we generate 3 different polynomials depending on what the query value was. Next, we're going to have to evaluate the Boolean circuit to kind of compute a predicate. So again, here, we need to first check if SNP2 is equal to 1 and sex is equal to 1. So we're going to have to apply 2 equality tests. And then since we are doing an AND operation, which is essentially a multiplication, we need to check if both are 1. And if both are 1, then if we multiply them together, the results, the predicate is going to be 1. And that patient kind of passes this filter that we're querying for. We actually support 2 different query types, an AND or an OR operation. I'm going to keep it simple and just focus on the AND, which is just a multiplication. Thankfully, we have that SIMD packing that I was talking about before, so we can actually compute all of this in parallel. We can just get we can just look at the ciphertext for each column and perform this equality test once to get the full resulting vector back. And this predicate that I mentioned before is basically going to be 0 or 1, depending on if the patient passes the filter or not. Again, we're computing this all homomorphically. So the resulting vector for this predicate is going to be encrypted. And it's going to have L slots, which is that SIMD. we need to perform rotations and additions kind of to aggregate this to return back a count for our researcher. So homomorphic encryption also lets us perform rotation operations, which is like rotating the ciphertext slots so that we can aggregate them. And this algorithm essentially just kind of rotates this log L times till we get the inner sum of the entire vector. And then we get back a count that we can finally return to a researcher. So what does this look like in practice? Well, for UK Biobank scale, for like, let's say 5,000 patients, and just having 2 filters like we have in this example counting query, we can basically perform this entire operation in 4 minutes, which is expensive. If you look at the graph on the right, where I have the number of patients that we're performing a counting query on, and the query time on the y-axis, it's much, much slower than the plain text solution, but it's still in the order of minutes, so it's not totally impractical. So that was my introduction to SQUID and homomorphic encryption primer. Do you guys have any questions?
I missed the beginning of your talk, but can you use this for like real valued expression? So like gene expression or protein expression instead of just mutations?
Yes, yes. So I talked about an example of secure transformer inference, which uses a protocol called CKKS, which works on floating point values and non-integer values, yes.
And is the penalty similar to binary values, or is the penalty much worse?
No, it's about, the cost performance is about half. So it's half. It takes twice as long to do this real value operation than it does for integers. But it's still very performant. It's a great question.
Could we go back to the transformer example?
Yes.
I think these are the numbers for with the homomorphic encryption
Yes,
technique that
yes.
they're using, right? What's the comparison with just without being concerned with the encryption?
Yes,
Is
I
it
should have
also
included
similarly
those.
a few orders of magnitude? Or-
Yes,
yeah.
yes, for sure. Because I mean, a matrix multiplication of this input size is going to be much, much faster. I wish I had the numbers on here, but it's probably about 102,000x lower.
I actually still have a couple of questions that I think I'm not understanding the noise.
Yes.
Or is this slowdown just because you have to like encode the values in a much larger data type than you normally would?
Yeah, exactly.
So how is it different from using like parity bits when you do like regular, signal analysis and things like that?
Parity bits.
I mean, okay, if you're not, I was an electrical engineer in a previous life. So the idea is that basically you have, if you can make your addition and subtraction, et cetera, at the bit level more robust to a certain number of arbitrary bit flips by adding in an extra set of parity bits and rules for checking them.
Yes. Yes.
You're just adding extra dimensions?
You just add more bits at the end of your number.
I see.
And then that lets you, if you can check to see like if any, basically, and they represent like sums of the rest of the data.
Oh, okay.
And so then you can see like, okay, if this part of the data doesn't sum to what the parity bits say they should, then you know that a bit flip has happened, and based on exactly what the difference is, you can actually correct it.
Yep.
And that's sort of my mental model for how this might work, but I'm not sure if that's correct.
Yeah, it's very different because here we actually have to, when we encrypt the message, we have to hide everything. So we have to essentially, you can think about it as like a mask, a bit mask, I guess, essentially, where we have our original data and then we have some masks secret, and then we do some addition, and that basically hides the resulting data. There are no real, I mean, I guess there could be parity bits when you like send it back and forth. But nothing here is kind of related to this idea of parity.
My
Or if you use the parity bits themselves as the encrypted. Is that what you were thinking? That's a good point. Yeah, okay.
Maybe this is a silly question, but is it possible to design hardware that does all these operations like in a customized way, or are they so domain dependent or algorithm dependent that they change all the time?
I think there's work from an MIT group to do this on FPGAs. I think that's the acronym. And it actually shows a quite significant improvement. I think they got inference down to about 100 times slower than plain text. And you can also see that there's a lot of work to do it on GPUs. NVIDIA, I think like 2-3 years ago, released Cutlass, which was huge for our space because it allowed us to do integer operations, 64-bit integer operations on a GPU. Since everything has to do, every operation, even if you're doing floating points from the CKKS that I introduced, under the hood, these are still integer operations. You're just kind of scaling them to be from floats to integers. So everything works under this integer ring that I introduced way in the beginning. So when NVIDIA started releasing all of these new protocols, all these CUDA kernels to do this integer programming on a GPU, that's kind of when this research angle flourished, where people started to take these homomorphic encryption algorithms and move them to the GPU, and you can see quite a significant improvement. FPGAs actually go even beyond what the GPU performance is.
Yeah, still on hardware. On the example you showed at the very end, the 4-minute, example.
Yes.
What's the hardware, roughly speaking?
This is CPU. So unfortunately, since we were using UK Biobank data, this is when we encrypted it, it was around 1 to 2 terabytes. It was huge. There's quite a significant blow up when you perform this, because the ciphertext, right? You're storing a pair of polynomials for each row in our database. So it wasn't quite feasible to do this using hardware, but it would certainly give hardware like GPUs, but it would certainly give a nice performance boost. Yeah.
I sort of have a question about Lauren's question. Sorry, I didn't understand how the parity bit stuff relate to the noise budget.
In the sense that, if you're doing binary operations, at the bit level, it's a notion of a noise budget where you can add more parity bits to leave yourself room to have more. Yeah, so you can have more errors in your you can have a noisier channel in the signal analysis parlance, and by adding more, but at the expense of your addition is now more it's less cost effective because you are using more memory to perform the same operation.
Thinking back to the question, yeah.
Oh, we have one more question.
Sorry. So you talked about runtime. What about space? Do you have also space penalties or there's a runtime?
Yeah. I can actually show you a different slide deck. Yeah, so here we kind of show the storage costs. So this is for UK Biobank scale, right? When we do, let's see, a whole genome sequencing, it's about 1,000 terabytes to store 250,000 patients. So it's quite a significant blow up compared to the plain text storage. And if you're doing encryption at rest using AES, it's almost the same. It's exactly the same. Thankfully, the packing algorithm really gives a nice performance boost where you can store a lot of information inside of a single ciphertext. You just have to be kind of clever with how you perform the query operations afterwards.
So this is storage cost. What about RAM?
RAM, yes. So the way I kind of implemented Squid was everything is stored on disk. And when you perform a query operation, you only load the ciphertext into memory that you're going to use for a specific operation. So for the filtering query, right, we only look at, in that example, the SNP2 column and the sex column. So you would load those into RAM from the database, and then you would perform everything on them. So actually, for the GPU example, you could load those onto the GPU and then perform the analysis. Those ciphertexts individually are actually quite large still, because you have basically one ciphertext for almost all of your patients in your database when you do this.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.